All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to get started and we'll let the latecomers roll in so we make sure we have time for everybody tonight. I have really been looking forward to this webinar, but I do think we need to start off today by taking a moment to acknowledge the lives that were lost in Illinois yesterday when a dust storm caused a deadly interstate pileup. It's a stark reminder of the importance of our conversation tonight, where we will be discussing how we can use the Farm Bill to support the kinds of farming practices that would reduce and mitigate the occurrence of tragedies like the one in Illinois yesterday. These kinds of practices should be the easy choice, but unfortunately, that is not the case. We're here tonight to talk about strategic opportunities within the Farm Bill to start making them an easier choice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Carden. I am the Senior Policy Advocate here at Farm Action and Farm Action Fund, and welcome to our webinar on conservation and regeneration. This webinar continues our series where we have been discussing a vision for a more holistic Farm Bill, one that prioritizes a full picture approach by both incentivizing conservation farming practices and removing existing barriers so that we can empower our farmers to increase their use of such practices, really to the benefit of everyone. So tonight we have this terrific lineup of speakers here. First, you will hear from our lifelong farmer, Kevin Fulton, owner and operator of Clear Creek Land and Livestock in Nebraska. Kevin has successfully transitioned his 800-acre crop and cattle farm to an organic production and can speak to the challenges he experienced and the benefits he has reaped. Then you'll hear from our collection of policy experts in this field. We have first Amanda Shafer, legislative assistant to Representative Casten, and then Julia Barton, organic policy specialist at Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. And finally, Chloë Waterman, Senior Program Manager at Friends of the Earth. Following the panel, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A, and then we'll close out. Context and background to this webinar. Our Farm Bill creates the incentive structure of our food and farm system. Its policies dictate who farms, how they farm, what they farm, and then by extension, what we all eat. The way it's currently written, it puts big ag's corporate interests and profits ahead of farmers themselves, to the detriment of our local economies and rural communities, our national security and environment, and even our nation's health. Rewriting the Farm Bill is a once every 5-year opportunity. Now is the time to lay the groundwork for a farming and food system that supports everyone from the ground up, from farmers to workers to consumers and their families. This is the basis of Farm Action's Fair Farm Bill campaign. Our campaign is centered around 4 pillars. And in February, we co-hosted the Food Not Feed Summit, the first pillar of our campaign. And over the past several weeks, we have hosted a series of webinars lifting up our other pillars. All of these webinars are available to watch on our YouTube page. Tonight, we are here to talk about the 4th pillar of our campaign, conservation and regeneration. Conservation and regenerative farming practices promote the ability to responsibly manage, preserve, and restore our natural resources, but their benefits to farmers and communities go far beyond that. They also build resilience in a farm. For example, improvements in soil health allow farms to better withstand extreme events from natural disasters to erratic weather. And as you'll hear from Kevin, they can improve a farmer's bottom line. They can also save taxpayers money by mitigating and reducing the kinds of practices that cost millions of taxpayer dollars in cleanup and lost resources. The Farm Bill has the ability to better incentivize farmers in a way where all of these benefits can become realized. A Farm Bill that encourages farmers to use these kinds of practices is a win for everyone along the food supply chain. But the problem is that our current Farm Bill does not make conservation farming practices the easy choice. Unfortunately, most programs under the conservation title fail to support the kinds of practices we will hear about tonight. In fact, most of the Farm Bill's conservation resources are ending up going towards the wrong practices. And moreover, many of the other programs like federal crop insurance have disastrous unintended consequences and create real barriers for farmers trying to incorporate more regenerative or organic practices. And finally, it treats these kinds of farming practices as an exception, largely separated from its major farm support programs. We need a farm bill to take a more holistic approach that acknowledges the multi-leveled benefits of regenerative agriculture and provides support broadly throughout the farm bill. This is why I'm so excited to introduce to you today our panelists who have a huge amount of expertise to offer about how we can achieve these objectives. A couple quick housekeeping points I just want to point out. This is a webinar format, so you'll notice that we have lost our chat boxes, but if you look on the bottom, there's a Q&A. We'll be hosting questions, a Q&A following the panelists, so we encourage you all to start putting questions in as people start speaking so we can get to as many as we can. Anyone who feels like they had questions that weren't answered at the end of the webinar, we encourage you to email us to them, and we'll try to get you in touch with the right folks to answer those questions for you. And with that, I am really excited to introduce to you all Kevin Fulton. So Kevin, if you want to take it from here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I own and operate a organic farming and ranching operation here in central Nebraska, where I raise corn, soybeans, wheat, hay, cover crops, and cattle. My land base is pretty well evenly split between irrigated cropland and native rangeland. Just to give you a little background, I grew up here on the family farm, started working at a very young age, got my first cow when I was 10 years old, started a cow herd, bought my first quarter section of land when I was in high school. So I've been involved in farming for well over 50 years now. But eventually I went to college and then graduate school, and then I worked for the USDA for a while, and I worked for 2 universities. And 30 years ago, I left the University of Massachusetts, came back to take over the family farm. I started farming conventionally, and it didn't take very long before I got really disillusioned with that. I was making just enough money to farm another year. And, I realized that I was just a serf on the land, beholden to all the large ag conglomerates that were selling me inputs that supposedly were going to make me a lot of money and more efficient and more productive and all those things, but it wasn't really the case. And also was a chemically addicted farmer. And that's not really what I signed up for. So I made a decision back then I was either going to go in a different direction or maybe get out of farming altogether. So 21 years ago, I kicked all the Monsantans to the curb and stopped using all chemicals and fertilizers on all 2,800 acres that I owned and managed at that time. And I started transitioning to a regenerative organic model. And in a nutshell, the result was I made significant improvements in soil health, increased my profit levels, and had a better lifestyle for me and my family. And for those reasons, I would never, ever consider digressing back to conventional farming methods. Farming for me is a business, not just a lifestyle. Our focus is on profitability first and foremost, and all the other benefits are really just icing on the cake. Farming is my only source of income, so it kind of has to work for me financially. If it doesn't, then I may end up living in a van down by the river somewhere, and some days that doesn't seem like such a bad option, but at least for now, I want to keep doing what I'm doing. So profitability is important. The good news is that regenerative organic farming can be congruent with high profit levels with the right management. And the key is using the right management. And for us, the keys for profitability have been to reduce and even eliminate a lot of the inputs and the expenses that go along with that. At the same time, add value on the marketing end with our crops, and becoming certified organic has allowed us to do that. We typically get 1.5 to 3 times the price for our grains as what they're paying in the commodity markets. Also, diversity is key. I have 3 or 4 crops that we raise, plus livestock, and that goes way beyond what a lot of the typical farms you see in my area that are just corn and soybean rotation. The other thing is adaptation. We've had to remain flexible and be able to adapt to different marketing trends, weather and patterns, changes in weather, the available resources, and even changes in ag policy. I mean, that's forced us to make some major changes in our operations. So that's important. So we tend to focus on profit over production. You know, yields are important, but they're only one part of the profit equation. I mean, have you ever noticed that bankers or other creditors, they always want to be paid back with money? They don't want your bushels, they don't want your pounds, they don't want your tons, they don't want your soil organic matter. They want money. And, you know, many farmers tend to be very competitive and focus on production, you know, and the bragging rights that go along with that. And that conventional mindset generally encourages horizontal expansion, leading to an attitude where it becomes more important to have your neighbor's land than it is to have your neighbor. And for me, I actually really moved in the opposite direction. We downsized our operation a number of years ago from 2,800 acres to 800 and focused on vertical expansion. And, you know, I make more money now on 800 acres than I ever thought about making when I had 2,800. And I don't want my neighbor's land. I need my neighbors, not their land. My biggest farm expense is custom hire. I hire a lot of my neighbors to do, come to my farm and do different tasks, different types of field work. And it's a win-win relationships that I've built with them. They need to pay for their high-priced equipment, and, you know, I need their help. So, and I get to use their high, you know, technology that they have. And so it's a win-win. You know, my crop yields are often much higher than conventional and with certain crops, but they're going to be, you know, lower on other high input crops like corn, for example. I'm not going to break any, you know, record yields on corn, but my profits are always higher than my conventional counterparts. And that goes right along with what university research is showing. Purdue University has come out with some compelling research where they compared the profits on organic farms with conventional farms, and with every single crop that they analyzed, the profits were higher on the organic farms. So that's no surprise to me, but it might be to some people. You know, over the years, we've participated in a lot of the USDA conservation programs, Conservation Reserve Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Cover Crop Program. And we've had numerous contracts with each one of those. And that's helped us move towards our holistic goals on our farm. It's helped us mitigate erosion, which is a huge concern with the increases in the volatile weather patterns that we're seeing. So I certainly endorse those types of programs. And I believe that the USDA farm program needs a major overhaul. Payments should be shifted away from large cash payments to those raising feed grains, to fuel CAFOs and factory farms. And we need more incentives given to those producing food grade crops and those implementing conservation practices. And this would increase our food security and also reduce the widespread environmental atrocities that are associated with many of our conventional farming practices. And I see those problems every single day, right across the road from my farm. And, you know, and as I travel throughout the Midwest, I mean, that's the reality. And the other thing is we need more farmers on the land. The average age of the American farmer is almost 60 years old. And if we don't give the next generation opportunities to succeed, you know, the farms are just going to continue to get bigger and rural communities continue to die a slow death. And regenerative organic farming provides a better alternative for future generations, in my opinion. And that's also in alignment with what consumers want. Recent polling by the Center for a Livable Future at Johns Hopkins University showed that 90% of respondents wanted ag policies that support healthier foods produced by small and Midwest and mid-sized farmers. 80% respondents wanted incentives for farmers and ranchers to implement sustainable, resilient ag practices that prioritize food for Americans over feed for animals. And last week, the USDA announced a $3.1 billion climate smart initiative. And Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack was quoted as saying, "The game's changing. Farming is no longer about what food is produced, but how that food is produced. The world is demanding more sustainable products across the board." And regenerative organic is becoming the gold standard when it comes to climate smart agriculture. My last thought here is, I got my undergraduate degree from our nation's first land grant institution. That was Kansas State University. It's started in 1863. Their university motto is "Rule by obeying nature's laws." That's a great principle, and it would behoove us to get back to that in our farming systems. And I can't think of anything that is more resilient than Mother Nature. That's all I want to talk about right now, but we have a slideshow, I believe, if Sarah's ready for that. I want to just maybe give you a little virtual tour quickly of my farm with a few slides and maybe point out a few things so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And first picture there is just a picture of me standing on native prairie. That's virgin prairie after some high stock density grazing. That's big blue stem that just, we stimulated the ground, and there's nobody around that has grass, native grass like that anywhere in my area. Okay, the next slide is kind of the same thing, only that's Indian grass, a native warm season grass, same kind of thing. Okay, this slide, if you can see it, on the right side is my farm, on the left side is the neighbors. You can see the difference. They spray herbicides routinely, I don't, and I have a lot more diversity. You can see all the sweet clover, which is great for pollinators and beneficial insects, and for adding nitrogen to the soil to grow more grass. And that road down the middle was the 465 expressway. I took that at peak rush hour traffic. This just shows high stock density grazing. I probably had about 500 head in that where I was grass finishing. It's more grazing. That's really high stock density, 1 million pounds of beef per acre there for short duration. That's 500 head of sheep grazing on native pasture. So we did some multi-species. That's a no-till cover crop with probably 6 or 8 different species of plants in there that we no-tilled into some crop ground. That's another picture of no-till. That was the only green spot in the whole county. That was taken in November, and we grazed that. And this shows where we no-till. We flew on with a plane, aerial seeded a cover crop into standing corn in September, and then we graze it later on, and that's in the winter and through the spring. That was a year ago, about this time a year ago. That was on a field of corn. That cornfield made us about $1,000 net profit per acre, and then an additional $400 an acre in net profit just from the grazing. And if you can do that, you don't have to farm half the county to make a living. We got cattle grazing out there. I got pollinators, bees. More pictures of the bees. That's milkweed, so that's in our buffer strips. That's just grows wild. The important thing is we just don't destroy it. We don't plant those plants. They come up naturally, but we don't destroy them. Irrigated or organic corn. Looks just as good as any of my neighbors, more organic corn. You can see some prairie strips on the sides of that field. Those are mile-long rows on a field that I have. Organic soybeans. Just some organic soybeans I had, and there's some under a pivot we're watering. And the last one here, that's the last slide. Those are oats. As I'm back in my younger days, I sowed a few oats back when I was younger, and I better stop with that.
Kevin, thank you so much. Every time you speak, I just keep writing down quotes because you just are full of so many great lines about why we do what we do. So I really appreciate you kind of setting the tone for this. And I'm excited to turn it over to our first policy panelist. Amanda, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, and thank you so much, Sarah, too, for having me on this lovely panel, too. It's really an honor. And Kevin, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your story too and your practices. Especially seeing those pictures was really powerful too. And I think you did a great job of really laying out that importance of how soil health can really help farmers and really focusing in on that and doing good conservation practices that have a good impact on the land and really build up that resilience. That's really going to be key, especially in thinking about how climate change is really going to worsen extreme weather events. Like, unfortunately, the one that we saw in my home state of Illinois just yesterday as well. It's really tragic and with drier conditions and more extreme rain in some areas, kind of depending on weather patterns. Like those instances and those tragedies are only going to worsen. And especially we're looking at the federal crop insurance program. Those costs are projected to actually increase between 10 to 37% if practices and climate adaptation practices are not kind of taken up more so. And really this key is resilience. And we really want to make sure that farmers can continue to farm on their land and are doing practices and are operating in an environment where these conservation practices are viable for farmers to be pursuing and even attractive for farmers to be pursuing. So we really want to build up that policy environment that makes pursuit of these operations possible. So one thing that my boss is really thinking a lot about is in changing climate. We want to support farmers in building resiliency in their land and actually reducing their own risk. So kind of thinking about conservation practices like ones that build up soil health, such as cover crops, and how those can be key part in mitigating a farmer's risk. So that kind of leads me to one of my boss's priorities this upcoming year is the Cover Act, which would actually make permanent a program that USDA has run for 2 years that actually offers farmers a $5 an acre insurance subsidy. So a discount on their crop insurance if they plant cover crops. So this program is fully voluntary, it's incentive based. It doesn't require farmers to plant cover crops in order to be eligible for crop insurance. It just really provides them that almost good driver discount, if you will, for planting cover crops. It's easy for farmers to participate in. I think, Kevin, you even mentioned that you participated in it yourself too. And the bill would also set aside funding for USDA to provide technical assistance to farmers as well. And we had farmers from all, nearly every single state besides Hawaii and Alaska who actually participated in it too, regardless of the climate that they're farming in too. And in my home state of Illinois too, we had farmers saved over $5.1 million on their crop insurance premium bill. So it makes sense for the farmers to participate in this program and to have kind of that stability as well. It also helps the environment too. There are so many on-farm and off-farm benefits of planting cover crops and building up soil health, including resilience to floods and reduced risk of yield losses due to drought, reduced input costs, improved water quality. Really, the list can go on and on and on. And this all also sequesters more carbon in the soil compared to non-cover crop acres and can really be key in making sure that we have a resilient climate change solution across all sectors. Not to mention, cover crops have actually been shown to reduce risk and may reduce the cost of the crop insurance program overall as well, since it builds up soil health and actually helps to buffer from crop loss due to extreme weather. So there was even a study that just came out from University of Illinois and a couple of other partners as well that found that cover crops and no-till were associated with a 24% reduction in the likelihood of triggering a prevent plant claim, so part of crop insurance during the wet spring of 2019. So that's a really significant study just in showing how soil health and being good stewards of the land can actually help to mitigate a farmer's risk. And then this is also a really bipartisan program as well, especially at the state level. Across Iowa, Indiana, and Wisconsin, they've all actually introduced bipartisan state level programs that are very similar to this. So we're looking to make this permanent as a federal program. And then not to mention, this is also a pretty good price tag, with less than $60 million spent in each of 2021 and 2022. But this program supported cover crops on more than 12 million acres. So we know that this program works, the cover crop program, and we really want to make it a permanent and reliable benefit for farmers, while also giving USDA the ability to start piloting discounts for additional soil health practices too. So kind of giving more flexibility to farmers to adapt and use the conservation practices that works well on their land. So overall, we really just want to ensure certainty and options for farmers who choose to invest in soil health as part of their risk mitigation strategy, and give them good incentives and good benefits when they are making that decision too. So that's a little bit about the Cover Act. And then I'd also say too, in thinking about the Farm Bill this year, we really want to make sure that we protect all of the funding that the Inflation Reduction Act provided to conservation programs. These programs have all been oversubscribed and just not invested in enough. And so the nearly $20 billion over 5 years from the Inflation Reduction Act for programs like EQIP and CSP and Conservation Technical Assistance Program, these are really essential for farmers to be able to make the right decision to farm in more sustainable ways. So we really want to make sure that they can actually access these programs because there is a strong desire for them too. So just in thinking about conservation, making sure that farmers have the ability to make the decision that's right for their land. So yeah, that's a little bit about Cover Act, and happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks so much, Amanda. It's great that you guys are out there introducing such important legislation. I'm really glad that you could come and share some of that with us. Julia, do you want to jump in next?
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Sarah, for organizing these Farm Bill panels. I got to watch some of the other ones that you had posted on YouTube and really appreciated being included today. I also feel really honored to be on a panel with these folks. So thank you. And it's a tough act to follow, Kevin. So thanks for going first and being funny and amusing and interesting and having great pictures, but we'll all try to, aspire to your level. I am here today sharing information on behalf of the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, where I serve as an organic policy specialist. Normally, we like to have our farmers do the talking. And so tomorrow when Sarah emails you all, she will be sharing a link to our website, which has a great video in which you can hear this kind of straight from our farmers and see their platform in writing. But today I'll do my best to just share kind of what they shared. So this platform arose out of a work group. OFA uses a work group model for organizing around various issues. We have one for each of our 5 Farm Bill planks, and then also some special topics such as this work group, which emerged a couple years ago and then worked really closely together this past winter to create this platform. That's the crop insurance work group. And that is a group of about kind of 15 to 20 really engaged folks who've had some experience with the crop insurance program currently. So most of those folks are farming similarly to the way Kevin does, growing a diversity of crops, but in kind of row crop systems, because those are the systems with which the existing crop insurance program is able to interact effectively. And the farmers kind of prioritized what their big issues were. And then we did kind of barrier identification and think tanking around problem solving. So what would be solutions that would help get those barriers out of their way? And then a platform emerged from that conversation over the winter, which was to make crop insurance work for everyone by making it fair, functional, and informed. So under the FAIR bracket, Sarah did a great intro talking about some of these systems which serve themselves, right? They serve the power structures that are in place. And you put it really well, Sarah, but I can't remember exactly what you said. It was something about like funneling resources I might have written it down, but funneling resources kind of back into existing power structures. So the OFA platform has 3 suggestions for making crop insurance more fair. The first of which is using more of a tax bracket method of subsidy dispersal. So the giant farms would not receive the bulk of the subsidies as they do currently, but it would be kind of tapered in the tax bracket system such that new and beginning and transitioning farmers who really need more support would receive more support, up to mid-scale farmers and on up. And the folks that really don't need the support, the large corporate ag situation, would be paying most of their crop insurance premium, because the crop insurance system is currently heavily subsidized for all producers, which means folks that really can't afford to pay for their own crop insurance are not doing so. Instead, the taxpayers are doing so. So on the link that Sarah will share with you tomorrow, there's some more specifics about that idea, which was generated from Eli Dean, who's a Northern Ohio farmer. They also asked that each operation should receive one subsidy and no more, so no double dipping, which seems like common sense, but needs to be fixed. And that crop insurance should only apply to land which is suitable to be farmed. Talk about a crazy idea, right? Like, let's just go ahead and make sure that the Farm Bill prohibits crop insurance premium subsidies on unsuitable land.
Oh, Julia, I think you might have frozen.
Oh dear.
Oh, there you go. We're back. You're good.
Did I look ridiculous, like a crazy face or something?
Passionate.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'll just keep going. Let me know if I make any silly faces ongoing. We also would like to see crop insurance be made more functional. Like I said, most of the farmers that participated in this work group were organic farmers. So they've had, or transitional farmers. We had one really engaged transitioning farmer from Illinois, Amanda and I were talking about earlier off air, who were providing input into this process. So things like planting date, right? There's a specific planting date currently within crop insurance by which things need to be planted. Turns out that that's based off of conventional farming systems, maybe treated seed, maybe they're not thinking so much about the next door neighbor. You saw that great picture Kevin showed. Let's pretend Kevin was growing, an organic corn variety on one side of the road, and the neighbor was growing a GE variety of corn on the other side of the road. Well, Kevin would have to plan for his tasseling time, and he'd have to make sure that those tasseling times are not going to overlap. That burden is exclusively on him as an organic farmer. His neighbor does not share in that risk. And those planting dates are also imposed upon him, even though they might not make sense for his farming operation. So we'd like to see a planting date for certified organic crops in each region with a non-penalizing grace period, so that those organic farmers can really work with their system and make sense according to kind of their own management decisions that they need to employ within that system. We'd also like to see some changes to transition. Crop insurance for transitioning operators is a giant mess presently, and needs a viable solution, because that's a really risky time for producers when they're trialing, working into a new production system. I bet Kevin has thoughts on this. You can see his face. Like, they're trialing new production systems, and they're learning and growing. And right now the requirements are for them to do additional paperwork, to provide an organic system plan. I worked with transitioning producers for the last 9 years, and in year 1 of transition, you're not ready to write an OSP. Like, you're just not ready to write an organic system plan. You need a mentor, you need colleagues, you need a community of practice to work with on your transition. You don't need more paperwork at that point. So we're really grateful to be working with Risk Management Agency's organic team and talking through some potential solutions that could include some sort of proof of working with a mentorship program rather than additional paperwork burden for those transitioning operators. Another really creative solution, which is getting a lot of traction right now, is creating an enterprise unit by practice type, meaning, that's a really wonky phrase, but the goal is, like, let's make buckets for the different types of production. So say I have organic crops, I have some transition ground, and then I have some conventional crops over here that I'm slowly working towards transition. Each of those would be treated in separate buckets and insured accordingly. They wouldn't be kind of like square peg, round hole forced into a program that doesn't fit. So that's a solution that the farmers are really up for. And then finally, I just want to be sure to mention whole farm revenue protection, which is a really important piece that's intended to serve small and diversified producers, but has limited utilization currently because it needs some kinks worked out. So we'd like to see more investment in that program, and we'd like to see the kinks be worked out so that those folks who currently don't have access to a farm safety net have access to one that is functional to them and honors their diversity of production as an existing risk management strategy. We have one more bucket, which is about being informed, which really has to do with cross-agency collaboration and information sharing. But I'll let you check that out on our website so that we can move on, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And as you can all see in here in our learning, risk management and the interplay of conservation and regenerative farming practices is so important to appreciate and how they interact together. So I really am glad you could speak to that. Chloe, I'd love to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. And I actually have some slides here to aid. So let's see if I can manage this technology. Great. Let's see, presentation mode. While I wait for this to hopefully move into presentation mode, I just want to echo what the other panelists have said, that really appreciate Farm Action for inviting me and for this great series of webinars that you all have been putting on, and just kind of consistently beating the drum of your Farm Bill campaign that's so urgently needed this year. So really appreciate being invited, and pleasure to be with all the other panelists today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of the Farm Bill for factory farm gas and manure digesters. So as others have mentioned, Amanda mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act added $20 billion to the baseline for USDA's conservation programs. So yes, it's super important that we protect these in the upcoming Farm Bill. But as Sarah put it in the beginning, not all of the conservation practices that USDA is supporting through these programs are actually climate beneficial ones. Some really have no impact on climate, and some are even climate harming. And so we, in addition to protecting these investments, because we do need the scale of these investments, the programs are oversubscribed. We have to put more money into these programs. We also have to make sure that the programs are targeted at conservation practices that are actually effective in mitigating climate change and conserving our natural resources. So one example to really watch out for when it comes for ineffective use of USDA conservation money is money for factory farm gas and factory farm gas infrastructure, things like methane digesters. And several of the conservation programs that are authorized by the Farm Bill and that this IRA money has gone toward do fund some of these practices. Plus, there was a whole new suite of tax credits for biofuels and biogas that were created by the IRA that really, combined with the state incentives that already exist, the subsidies through the conservation programs, and this new set of tax credits, many of which are redundant, are creating a real gold rush, a manure rush, if you will, for this industry right now. And so we have to look really closely at the Farm Bill for ways that we can blunt the growing momentum toward this trend. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's so important. So first, I just want to say it is the right instinct for the administration and for Congress to look at how we can reduce methane emissions from animal agriculture. Animal agriculture accounts for 33% of U.S. methane emissions, which is more than the natural gas category. So the manure management is the strategy that the manure biogas or factory farm gas strategy is targeted to reduce. It doesn't affect emissions from enteric fermentation, which is the largest source of methane emissions. And it doesn't address emissions from land conversion, from transportation, from all of the other parts of the life cycle. It's just focused on this manure management section. And unfortunately, it has some unintended consequences that we think will mean that it's ineffective as a methane reduction solution and can actually cause harm in some other ways. So first, a little, manure biogas 101. The idea here has an intuitive appeal. The idea is to take waste from animals that would otherwise be emitting methane from lagoon and spray field systems into the atmosphere. Instead, put that waste into an anaerobic digester and have two products created. The biogas product, which can be used for on-site electricity and heating, or can be transported and processed and used as for electricity or for vehicle fuel. And then it creates the solid component of digestate, which can be used as fertilizer, but is often has too great of a concentration of nutrients, and so contributes to eutrophication and harms water quality in places. But this is the idea. It has an intuitive appeal, but there are a few problems. So one is the Cobra effect that it creates. So the Cobra effect is named after, is an economic concept that refers to when the British were ruling India, and there was an overabundance of cobras. And so they set out to put a bounty on cobras and said, we'll pay you for every cobra you capture and bring to us. And at first it was really effective at reducing the cobra population. But then folks figured out, well, we could really make some money here by breeding some cobras and getting the bounty for the cobras that we're breeding. So then it actually resulted in an increase in the cobra population. And this is really the same effect that we could see with manure, because when you're incentivizing manure biogas, what you're incentivizing at its core is the production of manure, the production of animals in the CAFO setting, where these digesters really have to be used for them to be effective. So this can happen through increased herd sizes. Farmers could say, okay, if I'm making this money from the manure, I'm going to increase my herd sizes. Or it can incentivize inferior manure management practices. So one kind of glaring example of this is with any manure biogas from poultry, because poultry litter is dry and produces very little methane. But as we speak, EPA is recommending that producers mix dry poultry litter with water so that it does generate methane, which can then be put into a digester and captured as sold as biogas. And if that happens in the best case scenario, you'll still have a 10% leakage rate, and you're going to end up with more methane in the atmosphere than you would have without this strategy in the first place. So the whole idea is that it's creating perverse incentives, and really it is entrenching the factory farming system, the industrial model of raising animals that we need to move away from so many reasons. For environmental reasons, this model of agriculture is just fundamentally unsustainable. And if we invest in all of this infrastructure and the costs up front of this infrastructure, we're going to create a reliance on using this technology for years to come in order to recoup the fixed costs of those initial investments by staying invested in the CAFO model that we ultimately want to move away from and support farmers and producers like Kevin, who are using more sustainable models outside of the CAFO system. There are really grave consequences when it comes to environmental justice from CAFOs that I'm sure folks are aware of. And digesters can get at a few of those, but there are other things that they don't get to. Co-pollutants, some co-pollutants like ammonia, which is linked to respiratory health issues, is actually made worse when you use digesters. One study found that ammonia emissions increased by 81% through the digester process. So we're really not addressing the fundamental unfairness that communities who are living near large CAFOs are experiencing. We're also really facilitating this dangerous marriage between big oil and big gas, two of the most powerful and environmentally destructive lobbying interests. And it can necessitate, building a whole new network of pipelines, again, further entrenching the fossil fuel system, and again, potentially putting pipelines into communities that are already overburdened and suffering from cumulative impacts. And again, it just does nothing to change the fundamental CAFO model of production that we all want to move away from. All of the doesn't impact animal cruelty, antibiotic resistance, the viral breeding grounds that are created, the unfair contracts for producers, all of the reasons that we support legislation like the Farm System Reform Act to create a just transition away from CAFOs to regenerative and sustainable agriculture, including pasture-raised livestock. Which brings me to my next slide. I think a really important and dangerous consequence of all of these subsidies for factory farm gas is that it further disadvantages pasture-based producers. And it does this in a few ways. First, methane digesters are really only profitable, only viable for the largest CAFOs. And they only make sense, of course, if you have the waste aggregated in the first place. So pasture producers who are using superior manure management practices are actually not even able to utilize this strategy because they don't have those waste lagoons in the first place to be able to use as feedstocks into a manure digester. So there are already so many reasons that there's an unfair playing field for these producers, that Farm Action does such a good job of calling out all of these inequities in the system. And this is a way that the system could be even more unequal. Plus, these conservation dollars are precious, and every dollar that goes toward supporting a large CAFO is $1 less that goes towards supporting the type of agriculture that we ultimately want to see. So I'm just going to close by sharing a couple examples of how this issue is going to play out in the Farm Bill and some solutions on the table. So I think Amanda and others have mentioned the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the EQIP program, which right now is one of those programs that funds some really good stuff and some pretty neutral stuff and some bad stuff. And Senators Booker and Lee have a bill that would reform the EQIP program in order to prioritize those conservation practices that are actually the most effective and to create a more equitable process for who can benefit from these programs. So we're not putting all of the money into, a smaller number of projects that benefit CAFOs, but so that more producers can see the benefits of these new IRA investments. So encourage folks to check out that bill, let your senators know, encourage them to co-sponsor the bill. And then the last example that I'll go over is the Rural Energy for America program, which is a program that funds renewable energy technologies in rural America. So producers can apply for things like installing solar or wind or retrofitting buildings, making energy efficient upgrades. But the program also has funded methane digesters and factory farm gas infrastructure, as well as biomass, like wood pellet facilities, things like that. And USDA announced $1 billion of funding, partly through the IRA, in their latest round of solicitation for applications for this program. And REAP does a lot of great things. I think the rural America is a huge part of the climate solution. And by providing grants for forms of energy like solar and wind, it's really giving folks an opportunity to be part of that solution. But because the program also funds things like methane digesters and wood pellet facilities, it also can run the risk of doing some harm for the reasons we laid out earlier in terms of harms to communities. And USDA has piloted REAP as part of its Justice 40 initiative, which is the idea that 40% of federal investment should accrue towards communities that are underserved. But the way that they've done this in the REAP program is actually really insidious. And they've added a new category, a score for applications to this program, where you automatically get a significant number of points for projects that are located in disadvantaged or distressed communities, which might sound like a good thing. But again, if these projects are things like methane digesters that can actually further entrench factory farming and harm communities, we're just going to see the environmental injustices further exacerbated, and the communities that don't want these facilities, the companies that want to put them in are actually getting an advantage over other companies in this application process. So I just laid this out because it's a really timely example. This funding announcement came out recently, and I think it's a good demonstration of the stakes that we have in the Farm Bill. Again, these programs can do a lot of good, but we have to make sure that we're monitoring them, that we're making sure that the investments are really targeted toward things that are going to be climate effective and that support environmental justice and healthy and safe livable communities for livable environments for our rural communities. So I think that's the end of my slide. So I will stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Such a rock solid crew on our panel today with a lot of really good information. So we're running a little late. We're going to get to as many questions as we can. We're probably going to have to organize this follow-up webinar where Kevin can just tell us all his farming secrets, because we have a lot of other questions about that too. A great question that came in right off the top that I wanted to pose to you all, that was shared, was, I'd like to know how industrial ag caused the tragic dust storm in Illinois. And this just happened. I don't even know if all of you are familiar with it. But if anybody wanted to add to that, I'm happy to give some more background as well.
I'll try to answer that.
Thanks, Kevin.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
It's simple. It's not keeping the ground covered. Bare dirt and high winds, and it blows. And I saw that this weekend myself here in Nebraska, and I traveled down into Kansas. Terrible visibility on some of the roads because of the dust blowing. So it's not just a problem in Illinois, it's widespread.
And Kevin, I think you mentioned some of the practices that you use that help capture the soil and hold it still, cover cropping being, a big one that came to mind. I heard you talk about your buffers. I think it's important too, how you talked about, you said something about you need your neighbors, not their land. And it struck me that you're in a position, based on some of the information you shared with us about your profitability and your margins, that many of our fellow farmers aren't in and feel pressure to plow up every corner of their field. And so that's a lot of the work I think everybody here is doing, trying to, and why we are so supportive of these kinds of farming practices, not only to help hold the soil and protect our soil, which is a very finite resource and not only dangerous to people on the roads, but also, we don't get that soil back when it hits the air. But also that we're trying to help alleviate some of those consolidation pressures that our farmers are feeling. Did anybody else want to speak to that at all?
I would just add one other piece too. When we're losing nearly 5 million acres, I've got 5 tons of cropland soil per acre per year to erosion. It's call for a crisis. Like you said, this is soil is a finite resource. We really have to be looking at the resources and the practices that support keeping the soil on the ground to foster nutritious and healthy and food that we all consume, and then just keeping the land as it is for the farmers to continue to farm on it as well.
Thanks, Amanda. So another question that was asked was, conservation programs are oversubscribed and underfunded. Additionally, our local NRCS offices lack full staffing, particularly knowledgeable technical assistance. How real is it that we will see improvement in these areas? I don't know if any, Amanda, that might be, there might be a hit to you there as well.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. It's something that we hear a lot on the Hill from the farming community, from USDA even as well, where we have to make sure that we're providing not only the funding for these programs, but also the funding for the workforce at USDA to be able to help get these programs off the ground and kind of be the boots on the ground technical assistance for farmers. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this is an area where we can get bipartisan consensus for the Farm Bill. And there is also with USDA funding as well, like there is technical assistance within the IRA. So that should also help to alleviate the pressures on those local NRCS offices. Hopefully some of that will start to lessen up a little bit, but still an ongoing issue for sure.
Yeah, Julia, I was hoping you would chime in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that another priority that the OFA farmers highlighted in this platform is that they'd like to see expanded natural resource and conservation service technical capacity and cooperative agreements to support the adoption of soil health plans. So cooperative agreements enable NRCS to engage with groups that are working on the ground with farmers already. Like OFA, we currently have a cooperative agreement with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. specifically to reach out to historically underserved producers and help make NRCS programs more accessible to them. But wouldn't it be great if that technical capacity and those soil health plans were then tied to support that was received as a part of a farm safety net? Because with a changing climate and increased consolidation, like those lines connect to this issue being at the cornerstone of, you know, facing a changing climate and needing a functional farm safety net. And not just some of us need it, all of us need it.
Yeah, Kevin, just to wrap it up, you know, I think we've in our conversations about how to better promote cover cropping practices on a larger scale, you know, you've shared with me at least, you've stressed how important the technical assistance and education component is to that, and that there's a financial burden, but also the awareness there. I don't know if you wanted to chime in there and share some more of that with everybody.
Well, I think the incentives always go back to profit. I mean, and I think I've told you before that, you know, we spent $50 an acre to seed a lot of those cover crops, but we got back in return $300 to $400 in net grazing value. At the same time, protected our soil, built soil organic matter. We have 6% soil organic matter in some of our crop fields, and it helps suppress weeds. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, what's not to like about all that? It's going to make you money if you manage it right, and has all those other added benefits to go along with it. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't see a downside.
I have to wrap it up because we're running up on the hour here. But like I said, you know, please feel free to email us your questions, and we'll try to connect you with the right folks and make sure we get answers to you all. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for Q&A, but there was just a lot of great information being shared, and I think it was good that you all got to hear that. So I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. We heard from all of these excellent panelists about the importance of a more holistic approach to our Farm Bill, one that will more fully integrate regenerative farming practices into our farm programs, and one that does a better job of supporting farmers utilizing these kinds of practices. We heard a little bit about how we can do this. We need to connect our conservation standards to other farm support programs, such as crop insurance and commodity title programs. We know that these practices can both mitigate the effects of extreme weather events on farmers' operations and the frequency and severity of these events. These practices, if properly engaged, would reduce farmers' need for federal support through these programs. So connecting them, as Kevin said, it should be a no-brainer. And the next Farm Bill should incorporate these practices into the federal crop insurance, commodity support, and payment programs. You know, including the Cover Act, as Amanda discussed in the Farm Bill, is a really important acknowledgement of the risk mitigating contribution good soil health practices have to farming. Incentivizing farmers to meet certain conservation standards in order to participate in these programs is another way to significantly acknowledge their contribution to risk management. So if we want a Farm Bill that approaches risk management more holistically, acknowledging their contribution, these are the kinds of changes that we need to be making. We also need to make sure that federal investments in conservation farm practices go to the kinds of support the kinds of practices that they were intended for. You heard a lot today about how our conservation programs are historically oversubscribed, with upwards of 2/3 of applicants being rejected from EQIP. False solutions such as the biodigesters that Chloe were talking about are just absorbing too much of this limited resource. So these programs need to be strengthened and better targeted so that they can invest in the kinds of farming practices that will have long-term, wide-reaching benefits. This is why we're here tonight, to help rally for these kinds of changes. At Farm Action, we've identified some important opportunities within the Farm Bill. Keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow. We'll send out an email with a list of recommendations we encourage you to share with your representatives, along with some of the resources our panelists shared here tonight. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, and thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise with us tonight. Bye, guys.